Well, I wasn't actually one of those kids who enjoyed mucking around in the mud and digging out animals, but I always thought that science was fascinating. And I remember I had this almanac that it was a kid's almanac that I would read over as a kid, and just really enjoyed thinking about the solar system and thinking about chemicals and molecules and how life worked. And then I was really fortunate to have some awesome science teachers, even in high school, that really got me excited about the idea of learning biology. And so my parents were not scientists, but my dad was a patent attorney for his career. And so I remember he worked at a chemical company, and him taking me to, for instance, they had an electron microscope they were using to look at fibers or something like that. But I remember going to see this place and thinking, wow, this is really fascinating. I could spend my life, working in one of these rooms with all of these, this big fancy equipment. So I was pretty fascinated by that. I was really lucky to, then I went to college. I went to a liberal arts college, Williams College. But it had fantastic science. It really got me to start thinking scientifically, reading papers, thinking about all the questions you can ask. And that was something that I hadn't experienced before. And so I've just been very lucky, I feel like, to have had people who nurtured my love of science early on, and then just had an opportunity to explore it. This is such a hard question. I feel like doing science is hard in general. But, I think actually for a woman in particular, it can be being your authentic self. So a lot of times, I feel like we're always being judged, whether it's on our appearance, the way we present, the work that we do, the papers that we write, the grants that we write. If I like to smile, I like to try to make jokes or little off the cuff comments when I give talks, for instance. And I feel like people might take that as me being flippant and not serious about my research. If I appear very serious and I don't, smile, and I appear really stern, then I'm going to seem unapproachable and like I don't care. So, these are the judgments that are made societally about women in general, and then it extends to women in science. It makes it challenging. And, am I approachable enough? Am I going to be respected enough? These are things that are really hard, and they're out of our own control. And so the only way to really get around that is to, for us to change the culture in science. And, as somebody who's now been in the field for a while, trying to really help to create that change is important to me. I think another aspect of being a woman in science, although again, I don't think this is specific to being a woman in science, that can be hard, is having imposter syndrome. And, it's something I think we all have. I still have it. I'm always, am I smart enough to do this? Am I, a good enough leader to do this? All these kinds of questions. And that's a real challenge to overcome. I will say it gets better with age and experience and being tired all the time. So, I just don't have the energy to care anymore about some of that stuff. I have to, the energy that I have, I'm committing to my lab and what we do, and less about what people might think of me, or am I good enough to do it? I just go ahead and do it. So those would be things that I think can be challenging about particularly being a woman in science. This was a great question. What advice would you give yourself? I think for me, it would be take more risks. I tend to be pretty conservative about science, and I think I was always, I was concerned about making sure that I did well in my classes, and I always wanted to learn. But I think I would put myself out there more. I think I would, realize that failure is part of science, and that it's not a judgment on yourself if an experiment doesn't work, or the majority of what we do in the lab doesn't work every day, right? So to accept that as part of what we do, and to realize you're always learning, no matter what the outcome, I think is a really important lesson that is a real challenge, especially for scientists just embarking early on in their careers, because you feel like every time something doesn't work, it's you're a failure, and that's not at all true. And so I think I would, take a little bit of pressure off myself that it's okay, and to embrace the unknown. That's why we do research. We don't know the answer. And so, and that uncertainty can be a real challenge, but is very exciting. It's why we do what we do every day. This was such an interesting question, because my knee-jerk reaction was no. I treat anybody in my lab, regardless of their gender identity, the same. And then I thought about it more, and it's, we all have unconscious or, innate biases. And I can't say that I would like to think that I would treat everybody the same, but I know I don't treat everybody equally. I meet everybody where they're at in their research. And so I mentor everyone differently depending on where they are and what they need. But thinking back on it, I certainly hope that I've, been true to my commitment to their mentorship by getting everybody to, a point where they can be successful in the next stages of their careers and to be growing scientists. But it's a really hard question. So I certainly don't actively think about this on a, by sex or gender or by racial ethnic identity or by country of origin or anything like that. But I think that we all have to be very aware that we come to everything we do with biases, even as scientists who are being trained to only look at data and be very objective, because this is just who we are and this is how we are as humans. So, but I would like to think that I'm as unbiased a person as possible when it comes to mentoring people in my lab. I had women in my lab, and I don't know, most women who go into microbiology and infectious, most students who go into microbiology and infectious diseases here at UVA are women. And so I don't know that that the number of students in my lab who are women is an overrepresentation necessarily of our community here, but I do kind of feel like, I certainly, when I mentor women, I can't help but remember how I was when I was a graduate student and think about what would it be that I would want at this point in my career where I'm feeling, unsure of what would be happening next. There are, my first thought about this, the answer to this question was about, was it what you can personally do? And so things like that have helped me a lot, for instance, seeking out peer mentors at all stages. So we talk a lot about mentoring, your PI as a mentor to you. But, there's a lot of value to having a peer group of mentors who support each other and share ideas and feedback throughout your career. And one thing I can say, when I first came to UVA as faculty, I had met some women at new faculty orientation and other kinds of activities they have for the first year for new faculty. And a group of us got together and formed a group where we would have monthly dinners and just kind of talk about our experiences. We were from all different departments, all different schools across the campus, which was helpful because nobody really knew who you were talking about. If you had something to say, that might not have been a positive experience. But we were there for each other. And I think it really helped me feel like I had a group that I could just talk to when I needed to. And then now having, colleagues as faculty who will always be there for me and I'll always be there for them, I think is really important. The other thing is beyond mentoring, the concept of finding somebody who, first of all, finding a group of mentors. So not just your PI, but other faculty or other people who are senior to you who will provide you with a support network in different ways. So some people are great at how they mentor, students. Some people are great at the research that they do and organizing their time. And so creating that community of people who can help to advise you is really helpful. But beyond that, I think, and this kind of gets into now how institutionally we can do different things to help women succeed, is this concept of sponsorship. So the idea that, there are some people who say women have been mentored to death, that we get lots of people who are there to talk to you about your work-life balance and your family obligations and all these things, but no one's there to say, here's the person who you want to be the keynote speaker at your next retreat. Here's the person you want to invite to give a talk at this big national meeting. Here's the person you want to serve on study section, the next replacement on this NIH panel. And those are the kinds of things that when you're being evaluated for promotion and tenure and awards, that's what they look for. And so finding those people who can be your advocates in those environments is incredibly important. And I'm really lucky to have had, both my mentors as a trainee, but also faculty who are colleagues now as not just mentors, but sponsors in that way. And I think that's really important. And men are much better at this than women in a totally generalizing way. And so, for us to recognize that and find ways to lift each other up is incredibly important. So that then kind of gets into what we can do institutionally, right? So those are things that you can try to do yourself to make those connections. But, there's all this talk about leaky pipelines, and this has been going on since I was a graduate student, and it's not leaky. It's like women are being actively pushed out because we're not being compensated fairly. We're not being given the resource that we need to be successful at each stages in our careers. And so what we really need are ways to make our lives easier and make the playing field equitable so that we as women, and this also goes for people from backgrounds that have been historically excluded in biomedical research and other groups that have been that are underrepresented in the sciences, that ways to really make things easier. For a lot of the talk for women is always getting to family and childcare, and putting daycares next to your research buildings so that you can get there to, take care of your child in case they get sick, or making that easy for your partner, if you have a partner, to be able to make that balance, easier. Having somebody who's an ombuds person, beyond your department chair, somebody to advocate for you. This goes for graduate students too. Having somebody who's not your PI being your thesis committee chair, I think is really important, to be that independent person who can be supportive of you and help you in case you encounter issues. And so I think that we have a long way to go, sadly, but I think the time is right. There's a lot of women in research, and this is such a great job. The flexibility in my schedule that I have, especially in these times of COVID, the opportunity to work from home, to Zoom with people like you guys, to have these connections is really important. Most of the time, nobody cares where I am, but I'm always, whether I'm physically in the lab or not, I'm always here for my lab and for the people I work with. And so I think that just for people to understand that is incredibly important. And so this is such a great job. The freedom that we have to do research is really, we're very lucky. And so I want to make sure that's something that's available to everyone.